the misconception sometimes of guided holidays is that it's, you're set and you can't necessarily get off the path. But the structure these days is designed that it is evolved to make sure that it's offering unique experiences that you can't find. It's making sure that we've got skilled people that are people orientated and can relate to people, and therefore share great information around, local stories, personal insights, the history, as well as, the sights and the sounds of the destination. But they're bringing that to light. But they're also taking people to places that they wouldn't necessarily find if they were traveling on their own or looking in a guidebook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Travel Trends. This is your host, Dan Christian, and I'm thrilled to bring you the final installment of our multi-day tour guided series. And today we're going to be speaking to a longtime friend and colleague of mine, Ben Hall. He's the CEO of AAT Kings, which is part of the Travel Corporation Group. And I got to know Ben over many years while working at the Travel Corporation when he was running Kentucky. He was the managing director in Europe. He then went on to run, as you'll hear in our conversation, Tracoin, which is the operations side for Trafalgar, Insight, and Kentucky, all multi-day tour brands. So this guy really knows his stuff and is a complete expert when it comes to operations. But he also knows marketing. He knows sales, which is why he was able to take on the CEO role and move back to Australia, where he's originally from. He's from Melbourne, but he lived in London for many years. But he got the opportunity about 3 years ago now to move back to Australia, and he's based in Sydney. And I really wanted Ben to be part of the conversation because I have the utmost respect for what he's accomplished, and I know how much he had to offer, and you'll hear that in our conversation today. So thank you, Ben, for making the time for this. And I also thought it would round out our global conversation about multi-day tours, a category that I am very passionate about and I see a massive opportunity for, as you've heard over the course of this 4-part series. I hope you enjoyed our discussion last week with Michael Edwards from Explore. I thought it was great to bring adventure into this. And as you'll hear today, that's actually part of the name of AAT Kings. So it's been in there from the beginning. And then, of course, we had the team from Globus and Colette joining as well. So I really enjoyed bringing this series together. I hope each of you enjoyed and really benefited from that as well. And if you're interested for us to continue on the multi-day tour theme in season 6, feel free to leave us comments or send us a note to let us know, because it's pretty clear to me that we should continue these conversations. But I always want to make decisions for our content based on what's going to be most beneficial for our listeners. We'll be right back. In today's fast-paced travel industry, businesses face constant challenges, keeping up with new technologies, meeting ever-evolving customer expectations, and promoting products effectively. The real struggle? Managing it all in-house. That's where Travel Tech steps in to transform your business. With over 25 years of experience, Travel Tech is one of the most trusted names in travel technology, offering tailored solutions to fit your unique needs. They make it easy to create seamless, bookable websites, manage and promote products, and automate everyday tasks, giving your team more time to focus on what matters most, your customers. Plus, Travel Tech is the go-to name in cruise technology with cutting-edge solutions for tour operators as well. Plus, Travel Tech has just launched Tech Talk, a new podcast for travel professionals by travel professionals. Explore the stories behind the biggest innovations in travel. Visit traveltech.com/traveltrends or tune in to Tech Talk on Spotify and Apple. That's traveltech.com/traveltrends and Tech Talk on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This episode is brought to you in part by our friends at Stay22, the monetization solution built for travel creators and publishers. Stay22 helps you unlock hidden revenue with tools that let your readers book hotels, activities, and more right from your content. No pop-ups, no extra work, just smart passive income that runs in the background so you can focus on creating. Are you ready to make every click count? Then head to stay22.com/traveltrends and start earning more from your travel content without the ad clutter. That's stay22.com/traveltrends. And now, back to the show. Now, as you've heard me mention over the course of this series, I'm an investor and advisor with Tour Optima, and Ben and the team have kindly sponsored this series. And I just want to make sure that anyone that's in the multi-day tour space explores utilizing Tour Optima for your operations, given that their solution is perfectly fit for multi-day tours. Every time someone asked, can it do this? The answer is yes, as I've seen Ben do on a number of demos. Does it do tipping? Yes. Can it connect trips? Yes, it can. So they have brought on a number of global multi-day tour clients in the last year, and I'm sure many more. So if you want to learn more information, check out touroptima.com or reach out to Ben directly, ben@touroptima.com, to arrange a demo. Now, as we prepare to bring Ben into the conversation, I just wanted to remind everyone that we do post clips and highlights on all of our social channels, which you can find at Travel Trends Podcast on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. And then we also send out a monthly newsletter, which has a roundup of all of our latest episodes and our travel plans for the next month. So you can find that at traveltrendspodcast.com. And we just sent out the latest newsletter this week, and we announced that our AI Summit is returning for October 28th and 29th, 2025. So you can pre-register now to get early bird tickets, and we will be announcing all of our speakers in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be virtual again based on the overwhelming feedback from our speakers, partners, and guests so that we can maximize participation and benefit the global travel community. So wherever you are in the world, you can join us for the AI Summit V2 this October. So register on traveltrendspodcast.com or reach out for more information if you want to be a speaker or a sponsor. Both of those links are available on our new landing page as well. Now, I get the chance to interview a dear friend, an amazing colleague, and an industry leader, Ben Hall. Thanks so much for joining us, Ben. I'm thrilled to finish off this multi-day tour series speaking to you and having all of our listeners learn about AAT Kings. Welcome to Travel Trends.
Dan, great to reconnect. Always enjoyed catching up with you, and nice to join the podcast today.
Yeah, likewise, Ben. I was thrilled for you to be a part of this series on guided touring, and I wanted to make sure not only do we have AAT Kings, but yourself specifically, given your extensive background at the Travel Corporation, Tracoin, running Kentucky. Obviously, I highly respected you then and continue to now, Ben, and we would always catch up, and I'd look forward to it. And you, as far as I was concerned, were always kind of the heart of the operation over at Kentucky for many years. And you've taken all that knowledge and expertise and now leading AAT Kings. You've moved back to Australia, which is originally home for you. And I want to get into all of these things today because you are now the leader of one of these really important guided tour operators that everyone needs to know globally more about. But let's talk about your background first, Ben. So tell us a little bit about how you got into tourism and your journey through TTC and Kentucky, ultimately to land back in Australia and take up the helm as the CEO of AAT Kings.
Yeah, Dan, it's a great story. It's a great industry, and absolutely you and I have interwoven over the last 12, 13 years through business and careers and socially. And look, I fell into the industry a little bit by chance. I mean, I was fortunate as a child to travel the globe. I had parents that were English and Australian, so we were often seeing family and often having the opportunity to go out and experience different locations. And I think that was probably the initial inspiration, but my core inspiration was in about year 6, where I met a Canadian guy, and I was, genuinely taken back at how interesting he was and the stories he would tell. So, really my travel story from my perspective starts when I went to Canada. I worked in Whistler for 11 months. I traveled, bought an 84 Dodge Aries station wagon with wood paneling and traveled around Alaska and North America and had a great time. And then arrived in Europe with the intention of working in the city in London. And someone said, we've got this great industry. Why don't you get involved in it and you get paid to travel around Europe? And that led me to Kentucky. And I had 10 years really on the coaches around Europe, Middle East, Scandinavia, Russia, and that was great with Kentucky and also with Trafalgar. And then an opportunity evolved for me to move to Geneva in Switzerland. I had 3 years there where I got back involved with Kentucky and really get involved in the brand and the product, and web was in its infancy in those days. And then an opportunity took me back to London where I ran, where we connected. I ran Kentucky Europe for 10 years, which was fantastic. Young people, 18 to 35, having holidays of a lifetime and just creating wonderful memories. And then I had an opportunity to move to another travel corporation division called Tracoin, which was a back-of-house division, which did all the contracting for about 8 of the brands through Europe and the Middle East. And I ran Tracoin for 5 years. Unfortunately, those ultimately turned out to be the COVID years and tough times for everyone. But, we were constantly working at recontracting, negotiating, creating product and evolving. It was great, an exciting time in that regard, even though it was challenging. And then really an opportunity, Dan, came to come back home. I've got a young family, and the intention was always to bring them home and turn them into Aussies. And so an opportunity came through the group to move back here 3 years ago to head up AAT Kings, this iconic brand. And really, it's been wonderful being back here. It's a spectacular continent, great countries in Australia and New Zealand, incredible sites, and just the people. I mean, I love the people, the organisation, and really what they stand for and what we do every day.
It's such an inspiring story, Ben. And the thing that stands out to me is it couldn't happen to a better person. The continued progress you've had in your career, because as I highlighted in the beginning there, knowing you during the Kentucky years and serving as the managing director, there was always something about the way that you ran that business, and clearly you were so well respected within the Travel Corporation, family, and certainly Dave Hosking was a mentor to you, and clearly we both worked closely with Brett Tolman and the Tolman family, and to see someone like you go from strength to strength in a family business like that, and then continue to lead as you do now with AAT Kings. I'm so pleased for you and happy for you. And I just wanted to highlight to our audience, because when you mentioned Tracoin, I realize I want to make sure that I break down any terminology that may not be familiar. And certainly those people outside of Travel Corporation or multi-day wouldn't necessarily, there's 3 words in there, right, Ben? What are they?
Trafalgar, Insight, and Kentucky. Yes, all mashed together. So, I mean, look, you're right. It's not a forward-facing brand. It's a back-of-house division. And, as the organisation grew, they consolidated some of the back-of-house divisions. And one of them made sense was the contract division, which they branded Tracoin. And critical, obviously, how you buy in this industry, because how you buy determines, obviously, how you can sell. And, we had a large team that was responsible for accommodation, transport, meals, experiences, and they were brilliant, because they were the ones, you talk about this industry, and I know we're going to talk about guided holidays, and I know you reference sometimes multi-day, but in many regards, I call what we do these days experiential travel. And really the critical thing for us back then, and driven by product people, was how do we go and find unique and new things that could help differentiate our product and make all the brands grow because of what they had to offer. And I think that was the exciting part. The contracting was the contracting. It was built on wonderful relationships, but going out and discovering and creating, inventing was really the core and the driving part of how we grew these brands.
Yeah, well, it's certainly important that you have that background, because understanding the product side and how those multi-day tour brands operate, obviously that's key to success, to be able to know how best to market, to message them, how the sales process works. And so clearly some of the things we've talked about on the guided touring series is what actually makes guided touring really unique, and certainly the product is a big part of it, and understanding operations. So you have that in great depth. And so as you transition back to AAT Kings, and this is where I want to make sure that all of our listeners globally know about AAT Kings. I think most of our listeners will probably know of Kentucky, and some of them may know about Trafalgar or Insight. And so AAT Kings always stood out to me as a really fascinating business, because you have day tour, you have multi-day, but it also has an amazing history. As we both know, the Tolman family and Stanley Tolman had acquired a number of businesses over a number of years. And it was really fascinating to see how those were brought into the group, and how they were integrated, and how they were packaged and sold with other brands inside the group. But let's talk about AAT Kings to give everyone an overview of the history of that brand, because I've certainly seen in the marketing and the messaging, Ben, over the last couple of years since you've taken over, I've loved seeing all the marketing and the messaging, but you do a great job of telling the backstory on this company and how it came to be, and why Australia is such an iconic destination, all the places you go to. So tell everyone, if you wouldn't mind, the history of AAT Kings, and then what the business looks like today.
Yeah, well, I think you said the word family. And I mean, I think most businesses, they start small and then they grow. And our business is over 100 years old. It started with the Pike family. In fact, it started with a couple of different families, the Page family down in Melbourne, the Pike family here in Sydney, all which did original sort of transportation. So the Pike family did journeys over to the Blue Mountains and beyond the Jenolean Caves, which were probably a day trip out of Sydney back then, and still, core tourist destinations out of the city. And then the Page family, McGarry family down in Melbourne as well, started off with coach transport and taking people from point A to point B. And they've gradually evolved those sort of day touring products to become overnight products. And then the business has gradually grown and expanded and bought out other businesses. And really the name AAT Kings, the prime name Kings comes from a guy called Bill King. And Bill King was a pioneer early of Australian tourism. If you think back in the 70s and the early 80s, Bill King was really the one that pushed the boundaries and took it from, let's call it core city, sort of near city focus, to taking it to the outback. And Bill was, remarkable at, following the footpaths of some of the explorers that traveled this country. So famous names like Burke and Wills and Human Hovel and the Stuarts, where they essentially went out and traversed Australia and figured out ways in which that, we could drive communication and transportation and the telegraph poles through the middle of Australia to drive communication from the cities of Australia to the rest of the world. And so he was an adventurer and he was an explorer, but he really loved sharing the tale with his guests. And so he created a fleet that grew and became known, as the true Australian explorer and unique traveller. So his business tied in with ultimately one of the airlines at the time that reversed out its name, so AAT Kings, was created, and that business continues to evolve. Yes, it's had the Tolman ownership for a period of time, and now it's sort of moved on to Apollo. But it's a wonderful business. It's got a great history. It's got a fantastic reputation. It is renowned for travel in Australia and New Zealand. As you said, Dan, in some regards, our mission statement is around being the leading and largest tour operator across Australia and New Zealand. And really, the purpose of what we do is to deliver immersive experiences through our diverse group of brands. And I say diverse group of brands because AAT Kings in its own right is a group of brands. We've got See It, which is a small group tour operator based in the Red Centre. We've got Down Under Tours, which is a business up out of Cairns that does Far North Queensland, and once again services day tours and transfers and charter and works with the reef operators. And then we've got Inspiring Journeys, which is our small group offering, and then AAT Kings, which is the traditional offering. And we offer, Dan, the guided holidays, the multi-day that you've talked about, and those range from sort of 6 days through to 21 days, so covering huge parts of Australia and New Zealand. But we also have the day tours and the short breaks, which are generally 2 and 3 night stays. So works very much with the individual people that are coming here and want to join a tour in a location for a short period of time as part of their wider journey around Oceania. And then the other thing we do is charter. We've got charter and in many regards we're a DMC model for a number of well-known brands that we do the ground handling for their groups in Australia as well. So it's a huge mix and variety across the business, but without doubt our core business is the guided holidays, taking people across Australia and New Zealand and showing them the wonderful destinations and the great experience that we have to offer.
That's great, Brent. I appreciate you sharing that backstory. And it's actually really interesting as you trace back the roots that, the original company name, Australian Adventure Tours, with Kings like AAT Kings, that, going back even to the 70s, you guys were already ahead of the curve with the term adventure. So what do we call this category? Group travel or multi-day touring or experiential travel? One of the things you guys were actually ahead of is this concept of adventure. It was actually built into the name really from the beginning. So, but as you highlighted, Ben, and I want to make sure that any of you that are multitasking at the moment, I know a lot of people listen to this podcast as they're driving. So if you're driving, don't pull up the website. But if you have your laptop or computer handy, aatkings.com, and you can see the section of the AAT Kings difference, which is something that Ben and I learned very well from working with the Tolmans about selling the difference. It was always something that Stanley or Brett really highlighted to us. So you can actually go to the section on the website and look up the AAT Kings difference, and you can see the history that Ben kindly shared there, tracing the roots back 100 years, but the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. And the thing is that's the reason I wanted to reference that is that at the core of your business, it is guided touring. And that's what's always driven the business. That's how it was created. And that's what, but as you just started to highlight there at the end, all the things that you're across, whether it's Inspiring Journeys or Down Under Tours and See It, like, you've got Cairns, you've got Ayers Rock, and you've got all of these day tour opportunities as well as multi-day, and you do all the operations. So there's so much complexity to your role, and it's one of the things I just wanted to highlight to our audience, because someone running a business like AAT Kings that had been highlighted to me for many years is that, the leader of AAT Kings has to fully understand all aspects of the business. They need to know operations. They need to know marketing. They need to know sales. Some CEOs of certain brands are really a sales leader or a marketing leader. And in your instance, which is your backstory, that operations and now marketing and sales, like, you are, the full, well-rounded CEO. I just wanted everyone to have that context. So AAT Kings today, Ben, under your leadership over the last 3 years, tell us a little bit of how it's evolved and expanded, because obviously you've got quite a bit under your remit. So, but I'm sure you're always being challenged on growing the business. So in terms of where the customers are coming from and international markets you're expanding to, the one that is obviously of quite interest is the U.S. So tell us a little bit about where people can book AAT Kings trips for all of our travel advisors and industry leaders that are listening to this.
Yeah, well, look, critical is the trade for us for sure. There's no doubt. We're available online. We've got a pretty comprehensive website. We certainly are bookable via a myriad of different channels, because we have worked with the trade, but we've also worked with wholesalers and also specialists, Australian specialists or ITOs and New Zealand specialists. So we generally work with a mix of people over time. And that's the case in North America as well, Dan. And retail, we're probably not as well known in retail. I think, certainly the business evolved over time where we had a strong retail presence. As you know, we were sort of linked or are linked to Trafalgar. So, Trafalgar has the retail presence in North America particularly, and more presence there. And they sell essentially Trafalgar product into Australia and New Zealand, which, as I alluded to earlier, we kind of operate, so the DMC for them. So most of the trade may not have heard directly of AAT Kings or might not sell AAT Kings directly, but they do indirectly through Trafalgar and like for like in many regards. And we certainly treasure the Trafalgar guests that travel with us and treat them as if they are on a Trafalgar tour with all the Trafalgar unique points that are critical to that experience. But AAT Kings has also got its own product. We've got a larger footprint across Australia and New Zealand than Trafalgar does, just because they specialise on fly arounds and more sort of key well-known destinations, whereas AAT Kings has got broader itineraries that allow us to go more off the beaten track or to unique destinations. So, I think when you talk about evolution over time, Dan, I think what we've done really is we started to branch out to some of the destinations that aren't as well known. But certainly, in the last 5 years, as we all know, everyone's discovered their own backyard. And I think that has really benefited Australia, as it has probably every country around the world, because the domestic audience had to go and travel, and they then on the back of that decided to go to places that they might not have gone to or might not have thought about before. And that has really opened up huge opportunities for local businesses, Indigenous businesses in this country, and created some real opportunities and some unique experiences that we've been able to tap into, and we've been able to support them to help them create their businesses. So when I look at the product, really, we are bookable via a myriad of channels, but really this business has evolved coming over the last 5 years as to unique experiences, really immersive experiences, and really opening up parts of the countries that we haven't traditionally or haven't gone to for many years, and guests have loved those experiences. I mean, Dan, as you know, and you all travelled. Often when you go to a destination, you've got in mind the key sites and you think, I'm really looking forward to those. But in actual fact, it's the things you didn't know about that actually turn out to be the greatest surprises, because you weren't thinking about going to a family farm and learning about how they produce their unique apple juice, or how they create these wonderful cuisine meals, farm to table or paddock to plates. I mean, those are the things really that I think are quite unique in the evolution of our industry, and those unique experience, immersive experience, that is really where we're going to really accentuate the opportunities and the experience people have. Yes, you're going to see the key sites, but really it's those other things we do now that really allow people to personalize their trips and have a wonderful experience they weren't necessarily expecting.
Yeah. And I think that's where, just understanding guided travel and how it differs from independent travel is really important because clearly you and I both have this shared background in not only a knowledge of guided travel, but also a genuine passion and an interest for that style of travel. And I think what's interesting about AAT Kings compared to some of the other operators, and I'll just use, since I mentioned adventure travel, when you look at certain operators like a G Adventures or an Intrepid, for example, they typically had a source market and a destination market that they started to build a business off of. So for G Adventures, it was Latin America, specifically Peru. For Intrepid, it was Thailand. And really, many of these operators didn't necessarily operate in their own backyard, to your point about how that really changed during COVID. And there are exceptions to that, especially when you look at American travelers today, more of them, especially with some of the challenges in 2025 and concerns that Americans have of traveling internationally, just given some of the political events that are occurring. And so Americans are turning again to looking at national parks as an alternative to see their own backyard again. And so as we know, we always go from crisis to crisis in travel. You've lived through many of them, and we're having another moment again. But travel there's a through line. People continue to travel, and so the question I'm keen to ask you is, when you look at the history of AAT Kings and its present day business, how much of the customer base is domestic Australians versus international travelers when it comes to the Australian trips themselves? And then the other thing I'm just keen to know, as far as new destinations that you're expanding to or looking to serve based on consumer interest. But yeah, if you might break that down, because I think what's unique is you've been catering to Australia to Australians, as part of the origin story, but obviously a lot of international travelers as well.
Yeah, and Dan, we are. I mean, if you look at our history, traditionally, probably 50% of our audience is domestic and 50% it's international. And most of those are obviously English-speaking tours, but we do also work with Germany and France and companies there and create language-speaking tours as well. But predominantly English-speaking tours, and those tours have evolved, as I said. I mean, I think the east coast of Australia, the Barrier Reef and the Sydney Harbour Bridge and the Opera House are the iconic sites that traditionally people see, and then they go to the middle of the country to see Uluru. But I think really on the back of COVID, and really I think also a lot of good work that's being done by many of the state tourist officers and the regional tourist officers to promote their regions, has allowed as I said, local businesses to grow and therefore work with us to evolve and create unique experiences. So I look at Tasmania just as a spectacular island in the southern part of the country, which offers everything. I mean, it's not a large space, but it's got an incredible history. It's got incredible produce. It's got wonderful people, and it's got brilliant experiences that from outdoor hiking through to some incredible cultural and immersive experience down there. So I think Tasmania is a wonderful destination. I think South Australia has done well. I often refer that South Australia was the state that people generally drove through, but COVID allowed people to stop there and spend time there, and they've got so much to offer there with their Eyre Peninsula and their Kangaroo Island, and it's not fair that I pick out particular states or regions, because I think New Zealand has got so much to offer, and Western Australia, Northern Territory. I mean, honestly, it is such a brilliant continent, and there's so much to offer. And I think what we're seeing here is, businesses and individuals are being created on a almost daily basis, and each of them with a unique proposition, which is a focus across. It could be adventure of some, and adventure we know is such a wide definition between soft adventure and physical adventure. But a lot of people are after adventure, softer adventure. So some walks and some hiking and guided tours. You can see food is massive these days, and Australia's got some of the best produce. New Zealand's got some of the best produce. Both from the land and the sea that's on offer. We've got incredible wines. We've got incredible, coffees, and we've got amazing culture. I mean, one of the things that people don't realize is that, the Maori culture in New Zealand and the Aboriginal First Nations culture here in Australia. I mean, the First Nation culture, the Aboriginal culture is 60,000 years old, Dan. It's the oldest living culture in the world. And geez, they've got an incredible story to share on how they've lived and survived and thrived on the land, being nomadic and moving around over those 60,000 years. And I think really that is something that has also evolved in the last, particularly 5 to 10 years, that people are genuinely interested on, their culture, how they live, how they can live off the land. And you and I would look at a landscape. I often tell people that, you go to, outback Australia, or you go anywhere around this country now, because there are over 300 different Indigenous clans. And you look at the landscape and you sit there with an Indigenous person and you look at the landscape and you say, well, I could see there's a few trees here and shrubs and bushes, but I can't imagine how I would survive. And then over the course of the next hour and a half, they walk you through and they pick these little bushes and they say, here, this is medicinal, and here you can eat this one, and that over there is what you don't touch that one, but this here provides us with our art colors to be able to do our dot paintings, and just they bring it to life, and it's just incredible how they their knowledge and the skill they have of living off the land is, so far ahead of where we are, even as when I look at farming today. I mean, they have known how to live off the land and move around the land given season. And I think that's becoming a great story, as it is in Canada with the Indigenous people and around the world. And I think genuinely there's this great story that's coming out around the globe of, yes, we want to see the sights, and yes, we want to meet the people, and yes, we want to enjoy the cultural experience around food and land, but the people. And Dan, our industry is about people. It's about making sure that we've got good people we work with and keep them motivated, but it's about also making sure that we're showing our guests phenomenal experiences. And I think some of those experiences involve really around the locals and the knowledge they share, and being able to open those up to people to treasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're hitting on one of the most important points, Ben, certainly around guided travel, which is that cultural immersion that you wouldn't get from an independent travel experience by virtue of being able to working with a partner that has cultivated those opportunities and those relationships and done so in a responsible, sustainable way, and that is respectful of local communities and gets, getting money into the right hands of locals and making some of these much more conscious decisions. Certainly, you highlight New Zealand absolutely correctly with the Maori culture, with in many ways have kind of led the way. I mean, obviously Canada, Australia, and the US have challenges with their going through history of First Nations, but I think the idea now for all of us to try and move forward is exactly what you've just described. And I'm certainly seeing that, Destination Canada highlighted to me that one of the main reasons that Germans come to Canada to see the Northern Lights is because they can actually have a cultural experience and understand First Nations. There's multiple countries. And I say this specifically, Ben, because I still remember when you were launching Iceland itineraries for Kentucky, and I hadn't been to Iceland yet. And I was asking Ben all these questions about Iceland. He was showing pictures of the Northern Lights, and I was so intrigued. I've since been to Iceland a few times. I've seen the Northern Lights there. I've seen them in Canada. I would still choose Canada, I think. But anyway, the point being is that, as a tourism destination, the Canadians are tying themselves much more closely to the First Nations, as they absolutely should, for all the right reasons. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. I mean, even when we were in Australia, my family, when we were in Sydney for several weeks for work, and my wife and kids were there, they did a number of AAT Kings day trips, and it was actually the opportunity they had to understand the culture that was the most meaningful and what stayed with them. We'll be right back. Hey, travel advisors, are you ready to offer your clients truly amazing global travel experiences that they will never forget? Well, then you have to meet our friends at Colette, the most trusted name in guided travel since 1918. With tours across all 7 continents and 5 distinct travel styles, from small groups to small ship cruising, Colette really has a tour for every kind of traveler. Colette's in-destination designers are passionate travelers and regional experts. They curate experiences that go beyond the surface. Think dining in a local's home, connecting with local communities, and truly immersing yourself in the destination's culture. That is what Colette is all about. No cookie-cutter itineraries here. No endless hotel hopping. You'll spend an average of 2 to 3 nights in a centrally located accommodation. It is the way to travel in 2025 and beyond. So it is time to make sure your clients have the opportunity to experience Colette. Don't just book a trip.
Dive deeper into the destination, create memories with Colette. Travel crafted by travelers for travelers. For more information and to discover how Colette can delight your clients, check out Colette.com. That's Colette, COLLETTE.com. Hey travelers, are you looking to book your next adventure? Then you have to meet our good friends at Flight Centre, the travel-obsessed experts ready to make your next dream trip a reality. For over 40 years, they've been opening up the world to travelers from the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and now Flight Centre Canada is celebrating an incredible milestone, 30 years of helping Canadians explore the globe. From their first store in Vancouver in 1995 to becoming the official travel agency partner of the Toronto Raptors this year, they've been at the forefront of delivering travel experiences. At Flight Centre, travel is more than a passion. It's their expertise. From flights and accommodations to cruises and tours and even business travel, they handle it all. Whether it's crafting a tailor-made trip or tackling group bookings, they've got you covered. Plus, with exclusive perks like their new Bundle and Save, $500 on tour and cruise packages, there's never been a better time to plan your getaway. From the smallest getaways to the biggest bucket list trips, your travel goals are just a call or a click away. Visit flightcentre.ca/travel trends to explore the latest deals, learn about emerging travel trends, and start planning your next trip. Attention travel operators, destination management companies, and accommodation providers. Managing payments doesn't have to be a source of stress. Meet Flywire, the modern payments platform built specifically for the unique needs of the travel industry. With Flywire, you can collect payments from travelers worldwide with ease. Enjoy faster payouts in your preferred currency, reduce payment fees, and offer your guests flexible, localized payment options they're familiar with. Not only does Flywire simplify your operations, but it also helps elevate your guest experience and boost your bottom line. That means you can stop worrying about payments and focus on what you do best, creating unforgettable travel experiences. Discover how Flywire can help your business save time, save money, and deliver truly seamless transactions. Visit flywire.com/travel trends to learn more. That's flywire.com/travel trends. And now, back to the show. To just highlight the point about guided travel versus independent travel, given that is the history of the business. What are some of the things that you specifically point out to, and I'm asking this question directly for all of our listeners that are either have guests that might be thinking to go to Australia, New Zealand, and might be considering renting a car and driving around. When you think about the guided travel alternative, or as we would typically like the preferred way to travel, what are some of the things that you would otherwise advise travel agents to consider, or even travelers who are listening to this that might think, wait a second, maybe I should book a Australia trip and be able to book a guided tour? What are some of the reasons that you specifically would call out would be the big advantages and benefits of guided over independent travel?
Yeah, I think the first thing I need to say, Dan, is that this is a huge country. I mean, Australia is the size of the United States, America the size of Europe. So distances, a lot of people are surprised when they come here and they think it's a 45-minute, drive from Melbourne to Sydney, when in actual fact it's 1,000 kilometres. So, I think, people that look to self-drive often get surprised at the distances and therefore how much their time disappears because they're dealing with driving and organisation. So I think, when I look at what guided holidays have to offer, and I often consider that, as humans, unfortunately, we're time poor. And that's never going to change. And I think guided holidays really are a real benefit around, helping people maximize their time, helping them make sure that they get to experience as much of what they can in a destination. So, when you look at it, guided holidays pretty much take care of all the details of a trip. We've got experts that are on trip. So, with the drivers, the travel directors that are locals that know the places to go, can cater to everyone's curiosities. So, the beauty of guided holidays is a lot's included, accommodation, a lot of meals, certainly transportation, a number of inclusions. And, I think that the itineraries have evolved. I think, gone are the days where they were, rigid and tight and set. The itinerary is certainly a set, but they're now structured around, of course, trying to cater to each individual's needs. And I think that the misconception sometimes of guided holidays is that it's you're set and you can't necessarily get off the path. But the structure these days is designed that it is evolved to make sure that it's offering unique experiences that you can't find. It's making sure that we've got skilled people that are people orientated and can relate to people, and therefore share, great information around, local stories, personal insights, the history, as well as, the sights and the sounds of the destination. But they're bringing that to light. But they're also taking people to places that they wouldn't necessarily find if they were traveling on their own or looking in a guidebook. And I think, it just simplifies things for people. It makes it easier. It makes sure they maximize their time. I think the beauty of guided holidays in this day and age, and you touched on it before, that, the geopolitical world that we live in and unrest is that, budgets are tight and cost of living is looking at it. The nice thing about a guided tour, it's a set price. It includes a lot. And then really in the free time, if people want to go off and do their own thing, they can, and they can spend more, whether it's shopping or cultural experiences or just sitting down, enjoying the cuisine and the wonderful offerings there. But, it helps people structure their budget to manage what they spend and ensure at the same time that they get to do everything they want to do and experience it, because they've got someone that can cater to each and every individual on the coach to make sure they get the most out of their holiday.
Yeah, it's great. And this is the conversation I would have liked to have had with you 20 years ago before we set off on a self-drive around Australia with my in-laws in the back of the car in a Holden Commodore. and this was my Lonely Planet days when I was living in Melbourne, which is, of course, home for you, Ben. So we probably actually could have had a beer or a pint. You could have set me straight then, but we were kind of priding ourselves on being, independent travelers. And I've long since realized that, a Lonely Planet traveler really is a guided traveler, just traveling out of a guidebook and meeting everyone else that's traveling on the same itinerary and staying at the same hotels. And, so there is actually, you feel like you're fiercely independent, but the reality is you're still on a guided tour, even though it may feel more self-directed. But we ended up doing this, it was an incredible road trip, but, we drove from Melbourne, Great Ocean Road, all the way to Adelaide, and flew to the Ayers Rock, and then flew to Cairns, and we kept getting a Holden everywhere we rented. But and my father-in-law had said to me at the end of the trip, I never would have had this experience if you weren't driving us around, because I was the driver, my wife was the guide, and we did have a fantastic time. But I could say that the four of us on a coach would have probably had an even better time, because we would have all been enjoying it equally together without the driving, the hassles, and the aggravation. So for many reasons, I'm a huge advocate of guided travel. But let's talk a little bit more about the guides themselves, because one of the things that it always comes up as kind of one of the top three considerations. People are always concerned about the group, who are they going to be traveling with? And they always want to know. And the reality is, as we've both discovered, especially when it's someone who's new to guided travel, the reality is you're going to be surrounded by everyone that feels the exact same way as you. That they're like, they're open-minded. They wouldn't be on this trip if they, if you end up traveling with like-minded people. So you quickly realize that you get along with everybody else because they're all there for the same, looking for enjoyment, looking for an escape from the day-to-day. But the guide is the key, as you and I both know, that can really, and I ask you this question, Ben, because your background, you were a guide, you had that experience of knowing what it's like to lead guests. And every time my, family members who have since become avid guided touring, my in-laws took a lot of insight trips. My mom took a lot of Trafalgar trips, as you know, and Gavin knows, and they love that style of travel. But the one thing that always came up is, how was the guide? And they always come back and say, the guide was amazing. It was just like, and they're like, and so they talk about the group, they talk about the guide. So how do you at AAT Kings make sure that that is the experience that everyone has? So take us a little bit through that, because I think it's actually genuinely interesting for most people to know what's involved in becoming a guide with a company like AAT Kings and becoming a great storyteller and making sure every guest that goes on one of these trips comes back raving about it.
Well, let me just say, Dan, that we've all traveled with our in-laws once. It's always been an experience. I can only imagine what experience you had years ago. But, I talked about people before, and, you've referenced guide and you've referenced people on coach. And I think that's important when you're talking about guided holidays. I mean, there's no doubt that the travel director, the guide, the person leading, the local expert is without doubt the most important person in ensuring the group gels and their group gets to do and experience what they want on trip. And I think, making sure you've got the right people leading trips is in many regards sometimes the most important factor of an organization. So, we make sure that we go out and find the right people. We make sure that they are trained, and not just, trained on, how to communicate, but trained on genuinely looking after people. Okay. So, what we want is people that are people orientated, that, have got a mixed skill set that can really cater to everyone, because everyone's a unique individual on a trip. Doesn't matter if it's a small group or a larger group. Everyone's an individual, and they are on that trip for their, after particular interests of their, of why they're coming and why they've planned. So that, that guide needs to be able to obviously be able to communicate to the wider group, but also be personalized to an individual. And I think what we look for really is people that are coming from the particular regions that they will specialize on, and therefore they'll conduct those particular trips that we offer in Australia and in New Zealand. And they will have, they might necessarily have a tourist background. They might have been a teacher, or they might have been a gardener, or they might have worked in a bank. But what they've got is the ability to be able to understand people and engage with people. And I think, that is the most important thing here, is that, with time they'll learn more. With time they'll engage people and better understand people's needs and wants. But really, it's being able to engage with people and understand what they want and draw that out of them, and for people to feel comfortable, so that they can come to them, not just for information around things they want to see, but also if there's problems. I think that's the nice thing here is really these people are at leading the trips to make sure that they overcome challenges. And we all know that unfortunately there are challenges that pop up from minor through to major as you live and as you travel. And our guides there are to ensure that people can overcome those challenges as quickly and smoothly as possible and get on with enjoying the trip. So, I think our guides are unique in that they are absolutely locals. They have got incredible stories. I mean, we've got a guide in Tasmania who's a good example, who is a fifth generation Australian, and her great grandmother actually came across as a 7-year-old in very harsh conditions, 150 years, 160 years ago. And the stories she can tell about the family and the evolution and the hardships and how they've grown and the challenge just adds to the experience, but also gives you a sense as to how much knowledge they have of, the destination and how many people they know and how many doors they can open. So, I think, they're critical. They do a brilliant job, but it's also how they massage over the challenges and ensure that people can continue and focus on having fun is critical. And I think how they bring a group together, Dan, so tying that back to the people on the coach, a lot of people have, sometimes a misconception on guided holidays, but you've alluded to it. I mean, they're like-minded people, and, having worked in the industry for 30 years, you create lifelong friends from trips. I've got people, as I'm sure you do, and people listening, that you've met on a trip that you've connected with and you become friends. And you mightn't necessarily see them or speak to them too often, but when you catch up, and whether you plan your next guided holiday together in a different destination, or you just catch up socially somewhere, I tell you, the memories and the joy that comes on the back of that really, to me, reiterates the people and the fun and the friendly and the experiential aspects, that it all gets pulled together for people to enjoy and treasure for forever and a day.
Yeah, no, that's very well said, Ben. And clearly that's where I wanted to get your take on this, because you understand it so well. And the one other thing I wanted to ask you on this topic, and then I'm keen to talk a little bit more about some of the trips that you're offering now, because obviously the business continues to evolve and you adapt to consumer behavior. But the one thing, just as we, I guess, close out the discussion about the category itself, is the misperceptions that some people have. So I'd be keen to know from your experience, your extensive experience, what would be one of the biggest misconceptions about guided tours, and how have you learned to address that at AAT Kings now?
Yeah, look, I think that misconception still remains, and often it remains with people that have never done a guided holiday. Often people are critical until they get to experience, and then they open their mind to it. And probably same with cruise and other parts of our wonderful industry. But from a guided industry perspective, I think the misconception is that people think that they're rigid, they're one size fits all, and they're pretty set. But I think doesn't matter whether it's AAT Kings or if it's Trafalgar or if it's many of the other different brands that offer guided holidays around the world. You will see that they've evolved. They allow for greater flexibility now. They absolutely cater for greater immersion, and as I've alluded to, they really are about personalized experiences. So it allows people to seek deeper cultural connections, authentic local encounters. It also covers off on sustainable travel choices, which people are after these days. So really what we're looking for and what we're trying to create these days, and I think we've done a remarkable job as an industry and as a business, is those authentic experiences, those cultural immersive opportunities, and a real sense of purpose, so that it is different from maybe what people have visions of years ago. It is allowing people to discover, experience, learn, and do it on a personalized nature rather than just one size fits all. And I think I think that will continue to evolve as I call it, experiential travel, as we bring on more unique experiences and more opportunities for people to personalize their trips.
We'll be right back. Are you looking for ways to grow your travel business through paid media and optimized SEO? Then you have to check out our friends at Propellic.com. They are the leading digital agency for growth in travel and tourism. Propellic offers bold digital marketing strategies to ensure your travel company's success. They have a remarkable methodology that has actually been implemented by TravelAI.com, and they are a leading SEO agency globally and offer a range of resources, a podcast of their own, a blog on their website, Propellic.com. That's Propellic.com. And don't forget to mention Travel Trends for your free marketing audit. Our longtime listeners will be very familiar with TravelAI.com, one of our sponsors from the very beginning. They've sponsored the last 2 seasons and also our AI Summit. You might actually remember they were recently featured in Season 4, the 2 co-founders, John Leotier and Chris Jensen, live from Focusrite, where they shared how their innovative use of AI is reshaping the travel industry. If you missed it, we highly recommend going back to hear their inspiring story of building one of the fastest growing, profitable AI companies in travel, entirely bootstrapped. Travel AI is revolutionizing the industry by blending AI-powered efficiency with personalized, human-centered travel experiences. From micro-segmentation to tailored travel solutions, their mission is to enhance every traveler's journey while setting the pace for travel's future. Here's how you can join the exciting mission. If you or someone you know in tech or AI is looking for a new career that combines innovation and impact, then head to TravelAI.com or follow them on LinkedIn to explore more opportunities. They are growing fast. Thanks again for your continued support. Did you know that over 20% of people who purchase a ticket will upgrade to a refundable option when given the choice? By offering Refund Protect, you make it easy for your customers to protect their ticket purchase against emergency circumstances like illness, injury, accidents, and more. Whether you're an airline, hotel group, tour operator, ticketing platform, OTA, or transport solution, when you partner with Protect Group, your customers get peace of mind and you generate extra revenue. With a Trustpilot score of 4.8 stars and over 31,000 reviews, they treat your customers as their own, earning the highest customer ratings in the industry. To find out more, check out Protect Group at protect.group. That's protect.group. And now, back to the show. Let's talk about 2 experiential travel options, because this is where, now that we've kind of dispelled some of the myths and also extolled some of the virtues of guided travel, to bring it to life, I'd like to look at one Australian itinerary and maybe let's look at one New Zealand itinerary. And clearly you mentioned something that is super important for anyone that hasn't traveled to Australia and New Zealand. I remember how exotic both destinations felt before we traveled there and before we had a chance to live in Australia and really fall in love with Australia. I mean, I've left my heart in Australia. It was a difficult decision to move back to Canada. Don't get me wrong, I love Canada. I've been fortunate to live in a number of countries, but Australia is particularly special. and I'd love to spend half the year still in Australia. So, but that came from traveling there, living there, and then the multiple times I've been back since. But when looking at Australia for the first time and trying to wrap my head around it, clearly it's not possible to do everything on your first trip unless you have a gap year and we've got 12 months to spare. But if you're going to Australia for 2 weeks or even 4 weeks, it's so difficult. So I'd love if you wouldn't mind like picking out an Australia itinerary that would be one of the better options for someone to see the country for the first time. And then maybe let's do the same with New Zealand as well, since that is such an amazing country in and of itself. And the only thing I'll just highlight, and then I'll give you the floor on this one, Ben, is that one of the things that shocked me when I was living in Australia is that only 4% of travelers to Australia get to Tasmania. And I was determined to get to Tasmania when we were living there. Every weekend we were off to Perth, and we were just, we took every opportunity to travel within the country. And we spent a Christmas in Tasmania, and it was incredible. Like, it was truly an extraordinary destination. And when I was interviewing Sarah Clark, who obviously is a colleague, she's the CEO of Tourism Tasmania, and I was asking her that question, like, has that changed, the 4%? And interestingly not. Like, it's literally less than 5% of travelers to Australia will get to Tasmania. So that's just to highlight your point about how vast the country is, how many amazing places there are to see. It's really difficult to do it all. So you need you need to do a few trips to Australia. But yeah, Ben, take us through one great example of an itinerary just to give us a bit of an overview of what the experience would be. First time traveler to Australia with AAT Kings.
Dan, I always find this question challenging because it's almost like saying, who's your favorite child? And you never can win, and we've got a large footprint across New Zealand and Australia, and to pick one destination feels I'm not doing justice really to all of it. But let me just, last year I took my family on the Outback Adventure Trip, which is a trip that runs from Adelaide through the central part of Australia up to Darwin. And so, it's probably worth me talking about that one because that was just a wonderful experience there. A great group of people and my 2 young kids on the trip as well, which, worked out to be a good highlight for a lot of the people as well. But, we started in Adelaide and we went to the local market there and we had a guided tour and got to sample the produce and learn how the locals, cater and evolve and create, from the food found around and the landscape around South Australia. We then made our way up into the Flinders Ranges, once again there, Akaroola. So, you talk about night sky. This is one of these wonderful destinations you go to see, star glazing and see spectacular stars. We then travelled up to Cooper Pedy, which is famous for its underground hotels and opal mines. We then made our way through the landscape to Central Australia, and it's a lot of people say outback and it's scenic. Scenery is quite similar, but I found that every probably 10 minutes the scenery changed, and I was taking photos, which I've captured now in a process of photos that just shows how the landscape changes on a continual basis. We then got out to Uluru and the wonderful experience there of the barbecue under the night sky there, the Indigenous on-country experiences where you get to a local guide that explains the culture. Then through Alice Springs and up into Darwin, which is a contrast because you've essentially travelled close to 1,500 miles. And you've gone from a city through the wilderness of the outback, through these wonderful little towns and meeting these little townships and people that are there, through to, of course, the top end, which Darwin at that time of year is the rainy season, so it's lush and green, and there's different wildlife around, and you get to see kangaroos and your koalas, and up north you even get to see crocodiles. So it's a real mix of people, and it ties in really to our wonderful pillars around sustainability of people and planet and wildlife, and you get to see it on every trip. And that was just a great example through Australia of what we experience and our guests experience as well. I think from New Zealand, the South Island spectacular. If I talk about the whole of New Zealand, the New Zealand Uncovered itinerary is great. I mean, we talked about Maori culture in Rotorua. You talk about the Bay of Plenty and these wonderful beaches and the marine life that they've got to experience there. And then you go to the South Island and you get to experience the mountains, the volcanic landscape. You get to see the people, and you get to go on, into farms and learn about the cattle industry in New Zealand and how how they've evolved over time and how they produce the wonderful foods and get to sample those. And I think, New Zealand, without doubt, has got stunning, breathtaking scenery, particularly in that South Island, but also unique volcanic in the northern part. So I think, both, and you're right, Dan. I mean, New Zealand is a unique country in its own right and has got so much to offer that one trip doesn't do it justice. And the repeat business is incredible there. Similar in Australia, given the size of the country, and you've got coast, you've got mountains, you've got outback. I mean, to give you an idea of the size of the country, we've got cattle stations in Australia that are larger than some of the American or Canadian states and provinces or even countries in the world. And so it's just, to be able to go onto a cattle station and see how these people, live, how they get produce, how they engage, how their kids get taught, which through the School of the Air, which, is in Alice Springs, and they communicate across thousands of kilometers or miles so that people can, these kids can have an education, how the flying doctor service works that flies out so they get medical. I mean, there's just great stories and experience to be had, across all these countries, as it is the globe, okay, in the industry. But I pretty passionate about Australia and New Zealand and what we've got to offer, and encourage people to come down here because it's brilliant.
Well, one of the things that New Zealand was certainly ahead of the curve on was sustainability. And I know that's always been an important part of AAT Kings. Even when I started at the Travel Corporation many years ago, some of the projects that you had on with it used to be the case that certain brands had a project they got involved in, and obviously that evolved to tread right and make travel matter. So tell everyone a little bit about the sustainability aspect of AAT Kings, because I'm encouraged that more and more travelers today are prioritizing sustainability and being conscientious of the companies they choose to book with based on the carbon footprint or the impact they're going to have. So tell us a little bit about how AAT Kings works in this regard, because I know you got a number of different projects around people, planet, wildlife.
Yeah, look, sustainability has been prominent for us for years, which is, in many regards, I'd like to think the organisation sort of led the way in that area. But everything we do really is built around sustainability these days. So how we operate, how we engage, where we take people, really ties into those pillars you've talked about, Dan. And we have what we call Make Travel Matter experiences, where we engage with local people. So whether it's a local guide to take you through the botanical gardens, to tell you about the various plants that are unique to each of the countries we visit. If it's as I've already talked about, going onto a farm, going onto a personal property to understand how people have created their businesses and how they've, utilized the land and sustainable methods to make sure that is, preserved and ongoing for the future. You talked about Kiwi hatchery. We could talk about obviously the Tassie Devils in Tasmania. They're animals that are unique to the countries that we go to, that we're trying to educate, take people to support, but also to learn about and also to understand. And then the planet in its own right. I mean, I think it's such a vast country in Australia. And New Zealand, so spectacular, as you talked about. It's about how do we help preserve and educate people. So how do we do our part on, as an example, our latest offering here is working with a company up in the Daintree called Rainforest Rescue. And they're an organisation that has gradually accumulated money to purchase back land that has been unfortunately taken from the rainforest and cultivated. And what they're doing is returning it to rainforest. So they've got a shed, a large football field, a shed with, hundreds of different plants, and they've purchased the land and they're reforesting the lands to rebuild the rainforest and grow, evolve the Daintree back to where it was, the oldest, rainforest in the world. So, supporting those activities and being able to take our guests to those experiences really adds value. They understand what we're doing as an organization, how we're helping and how we're growing. And how that sustainable thing is real rather than being greenwashing. It's real in everything we do and what we want to achieve.
No, I appreciate giving that context, because Again, like I know how important it has been to you and to the team and the business. And I'm just now seeing again, really encouraging because we did this analysis with Kentucky in the USA pre-pandemic, and out of a top 10 reasons, it was always like 8, 9, or 10. Like it was just great to see that it was there, but it was not a key reason for decision making. And we're certainly seeing more and more that is. So I definitely encourage those of you who are, looking at the credentials of these companies to look at AAT Kings as a great leader and an example in that regard. And the other thing I wanted to highlight too is just in terms of how these multi-day tour trips are evolving as we have this conversation kind of going into the middle of 2025. And as most of our listeners know, I'm quite bullish on guided touring based on the demographic changes and consumer behavior changes, over the next decade, despite, some of the challenges we may see, this year, for example, given tariffs and some of the trade challenges, but nevertheless, and consumer sentiment by virtue of that, becoming a little bit more cautious. Obviously, we've had 3 great years and now we're running into some choppy waters, but the reality is travelers are going to keep continuing to travel. And some of the numbers, Ben, I'm actually really reassured to see are coming out of your part of the world where Australians are still traveling, very much so. And outbound travel is much stronger out of Australia now as we're having this conversation than it is, say, out of the US at the moment. So hopefully you guys continue to be in that fortunate position. But I just wanted to highlight some of the other things that are evolving with guided touring. And one of them is technology. I know that is not critical to the delivery of these experiences because of the guide and the coach and but just genuinely keen, as you guys have evolved your websites and your social media activity and all the things that you're doing and moving in the right direction. How important is technology today, 2025? We don't need to get into AI. There's certainly enough to talk about on that topic, so I'm not but yeah, in terms of technology, how are you guys looking at that and approaching that and trying to build in certain functionality to enhance the consumer experience?
Yeah, technology is constantly evolving, Dan, and I think it is all through the business, and believe it or not, it's also on the operating side, and we'll touch on that. But if you think really what you're trying to do is how do you make your from a booking standpoint and engaging with the trade, how do you make it as seamless and easy as possible to book? And so what we've created over a period of time is really a travel agent portal, or an opportunity for people to be able to go in there and book seamlessly. And obviously can put all the information in there. We've got a guest portal as well that the guests can go in and put in their personal details, but also highlight some of the things that they might want to do or experience, or some of the questions they've got. And that then flows through to the operations team, and particularly to the guide, so that they've got an understanding before the trip starts around what someone might have an interest in, or a special request or a special occasion, so that they're aware of these and can start thinking about how they might engage or respond to those or support those as needed. We've created a series of podcasts in the last year or so to help people understand, like this, Dan, exactly. So podcasts help people understand our product and our offering and our experiences and our people. So once again, I think we've got about 21 of those podcasts now. They're short, 15-minute podcasts people can easily listen to. We sort of looked upon it as how do people in a time challenge environment, how can people multitask, and how can people learn about us? So whether it's driving to work, or whether it's they're doing something and they can listen to it, there's short podcasts to help explain a little bit more about AAT Kings and what we offer and why people should book us. And then, as I said, Dan, from an operations perspective, we're trying to continue that seamless process through, so the information flows through to the people leading and connecting with the people, so that they've got a sense as to how they can personalize that trip for that individual to make sure that they get out of it what they want. And Dan, with tech, it's constantly evolving, and it's a huge focus for all of us is how do we improve, how to become more seamless and easier to book and work with, how do we make sure that it's easier for us to work with our partners from a connectivity piece, to make sure that the information flows through, so that everyone has got as much information as possible that they need to be able to deliver and perform and ensure that our guests get the holidays of a lifetime, and they go back to the channels they've booked through Travel Edge, etc., and pass back the good word of what an experience, and how seamless and how enjoyable, and how it allowed them to focus on the fun and the holiday, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when you think about the trip experience. I think that's the part that now is there's going to be an element of digital companies like Tour Optima and some of these platforms that are out there that empower the leaders to connect with the guests on the trip, and so it's going to be interesting to see how that the on trip evolves. But I think what you highlighted for sure is so important to know is the booking process, whether it's B2C or B2B, and the consumer journey, which ultimately people just want to know that they've got the security, that they've booked with a trusted operator, that they're going to be taken care of when they get to the destination. And so the other thing I wanted to ask you about too, Ben, is the importance of team in all of this, because as AAT Kings has continued to evolve and the experiences evolve, one of the key aspects for you is having great people around you. And one of the things that's always stood out to me based on your leadership is you attract great people that want to work with you, Ben, and they also stay. And so like you retain great people as well. And I think I can list a number of examples because we've got a lot of colleagues in common. And we recently connected actually on LinkedIn with you, recognizing Celia and some of the team members that are part of AAT Kings, and I find it heartwarming to see that people are so happy working within the brand, working with you, which is not a surprise to me, but it's great to see your mentorship and how you're bringing those people along. So I just wanted to get one of the things that's important to me on this podcast for all those people out there that are looking to get into the industry or come back to the industry is someone like yourself, leadership advice and guidance on, what it is that enables you to be such a strong and effective leader. So I'm sure people have got that sense from our conversation. So I'd love you to put you on the spot now, Ben, and get an understanding of how you approach your vision for AAT Kings and how you manage to, keep yourself motivated and lead a team that clearly wants to grow the business with you.
Yeah, Dan, I've touched on it before, and I've talked about people, and, the people that we engage with, obviously directly our staff, and they are critical. But we've obviously got our guests, we've got our key partners that we work with. So, it is a people-orientated industry. So you need to be, if you enjoy people, then it is the right place to be. And there's nothing better, we all take home a paycheck, but I've always been a big believer. I love recognition. It doesn't have to be monetary. To see a smile on someone's face, or to see the inspiration they get from an action is to me as rewarding as and sometimes more rewarding than the monetary side. So, to me it becomes natural. You want to see that people are treated individually. So, I try and obviously engage with people on a one-to-one basis rather than collective. Sometimes it's harder to do, but I make a point of, in the office, I walk around the office at least once a day and engage and have eye contact with everyone and stop by and see how they're going. And, if there's any questions they've got. So, communication's key. I try and have consistent communication to the business, to our partners, and I try and encourage that from my team, because I think consistent communication is critical. If people understand where you are, what you're saying, what you're doing, when you're doing it, then they're far more comfortable with making sure that they fit into it and achieve what you're hoping to do. I encourage people. I'm generally a pretty positive person, so I think it is a challenging industry. It has its ups and downs for sure, but I think you need to be positive and you need to believe that the next tomorrow is going to be a better day than today, and it's going to be a better experience for people. And I think you try and encourage and foster that positiveness and encouragement openly through a business. And then you just try and, look at people and get a sense of people and understand where people are coming from, because every staff member, every person we deal with, as it is on a trip, is different. And so you try and look at people and understand, what sort of a day are they having and how do I need to change my approach and my engagement with them to make sure that I'm catering and aware of what they are and maybe what they're going through, because we've all got good days, we've all got bad days, and really trying to then give them clarity around a purpose. What are we trying to achieve? What is the aim with the end in mind? And then how the steps, the small steps we're going to take to achieve that, and just making sure that you're there to motivate them, keep them on point, keep them targeted, and celebrate the successes, which is critical. So in a very quick couple of minutes, that's probably sums it up, Dan.
No, I think you did a great job of summing it up, because obviously Dave Hosking would highlight to both of us, it's all about the people. And the interesting thing I've certainly seen with your leadership there is that you've retained great people and you've brought in new people. So like Nikki Bruce has come into AAT Kings, so you've got a new head of marketing. You've and then people like Peter Rasmussen, who I always adored seeing Peter, who does the website. Every time I'd come to the office, come over to AAT Kings, he'd be wearing a cool new T-shirt with a message on it. And he was like, I always pick out a new shirt for you. And I just like, he's part of the culture of the organization. And it's like, and there's certain people that just continue to be there and thrive. And so, credit to you, Ben. I really wanted to ask you that because I thought that our listeners could benefit from understanding your approach. And but in terms of where this business is headed, tell us a little bit. I just got a few last questions for you here, but tell us what the vision for AAT Kings is, Ben, as you look forward, the next 3 to 5 years. How do you see the business evolving? What are some of the things that are happening in 2025 and going into 2026 that our listeners should be paying attention to?
Yeah, look, we're evolving our product offering. We're evolving the destinations we go to, and we've sort of talked about that through the course of the podcast. Certainly group size is an interesting one for us. We do offer small groups through Inspiring Journeys and the larger groups, the AAT Kings. But I think, certainly evolving that small group offering is certainly something that we're focused on. It allows you to go to, a more broader and unique destination than maybe we can go to on some of our other trips. So looking at how, once again, we can open up other parts of Australia and New Zealand to take people to. And really looking at how we can grow those immersive experiences. We talked about, being able to go into more of people's backyards or to experience more local Indigenous guides and to really open up the opportunities and the unique offerings that we have to offer. So, that along with technology, because I think they go parallel, is how you evolve that technology piece. And how do you, engage with people, and how do you then communicate your offerings so people, better understand the opportunity of traveling with you and the benefits of traveling with you. So I think that's all sort of rolled in on our sort of plan over the next few years to continue to evolve and how we've done it over the last couple of years as well. So, the 5-year plan and the success and the great results we're seeing, I think is positive that, we're on the right path and the vision's strong.
Yeah, that's great. No, it's really exciting, Ben. And I'm certainly keen to track and follow your progress given our longstanding friendship and continued connection. So I want to make sure that people are able to learn more about AAT Kings and find out more to be able to either book a trip with you or to book their guests with you. So you mentioned the podcast, and I want to make sure everyone knows like the A-List Access podcast, which I was actually joking with Ben just before our call started because we share a friend in Campbell Harris who runs Global Journeys, and he's part of their feedback team that Ben set up. And it was one of the things that came up in their conversation was actually, you guys should start a podcast, and you guys got on and got one going. He's a big fan of podcasts. He's a big fan of our podcast. Obviously, we both know Campbell quite well. But that's a great way for people to learn more about AAT Kings and stay connected to you. But what are some of the other ways they should do? Obviously, they got the website. You've got yourself, Ben. But what would be the channels you'd point people to?
Yeah, look, the main ones are the website, the travel agency business. The podcasts are a great information source. We've also got sales and marketing teams on the ground globally. So, certainly reach out to your local sales and marketing teams to support. And look out for socials. We're prominent in social channels. Certainly, present in LinkedIn. Certainly. Instagram, not so much TikTok given the demographics, but certainly on the key socials we're there and highlighting, because I think Dan, it's been great to join you today on the podcast, and it's great to talk about and I think we've got brilliant product, but sometimes it's very two-dimensional when you talk about it, and we know that video is critical these days. So through the socials, Facebook and Instagram in particular is where we tend to spend a lot of time. It's got great photos, great videos that really highlight the experiences and the offerings and what we do. So join our community on Facebook. Link on LinkedIn obviously as well, but also on Instagram, and you'll get to visually see what we offer. And I think that just is, if you want to call it the cherry on the cake of really what we do, because I think there will show you our guests enjoying their experiences and our unique offerings and those immersive experience that we treasure and pride ourselves on.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate mentioning those. And I'm going to ask you one last question on a personal note. And that is, since you've got two young kids, and this is where, Ben, obviously, I say I got a great respect and appreciation for you, and it's a different dynamic we have because obviously we worked together for so many years. But so I got I know you live near John Bolding, and John was a big fan of yours as well, and a good friend. But yeah, you've got two young kids, and I'm assuming you got some plans for travel. I have to be careful of saying summer travel because obviously you're flipped in terms of seasons. But yeah, in terms of your personal travel for 2020-25, what are some of the what's the next big family trip that you guys have planned?
Well, we're bouncing between two. I mean, Dan, I love travel to the point where I'd go traveling tomorrow and travel the rest of my life if I could. But look, we're currently sort of debating whether we go to the Kimberleys, which is the sort of northwest region of Australia, and stunning scenery and landscapes and gorges and water and waterfalls, etc., or going to New Zealand, and the scenery of New Zealand and the wonderful friendly nature of New Zealand, and all has to offer there. Yeah, I think we're leaning towards the Kimberley, but either. If it's not New Zealand this year, then certainly be next year. And conversely, I want to get back to Europe and see all my great friends there. I love North America. As I said, Dan, the list is long and it teases me on a daily basis, but I've been lucky and privileged to see a lot of the world, and I look forward to seeing more of it, including my own backyard in Australia and New Zealand in the coming years.
Well, I was really hoping you were going to say Toronto, and you're going to be here in a few weeks, and I was going to say, perfect, we can stay at our house and we can put you up and have a barbecue. The time will come. You've certainly inspired me before on trips that you've taken and educated me on places that I should go to, so that was actually one of the reasons I wanted to ask you that question, because I would certainly gladly follow in your footsteps after you make a recommendation. So I'll be keen to know exactly what you decide, and look forward to catching up with you again once you've had that trip, because the Kimberley sounds amazing. And the place I need to get to, Ben, at some point is the top end. It's the only part of Australia we didn't get to, and it's still it haunts me a little bit. I'm like, I've got to get to Darwin. I've got to get to Kakadu National Park. And so I look forward to coming back to Australia and hopefully seeing you, and then obviously having a chance to experience that part of the country. But I'm thrilled that we had this time to have the conversation together and actually make this part of this guided touring series. And the 4 brands that we brought together for this were, the 4 of the great leading companies in this space. We started off with Globus, and then we had Colette, and then Explore. And now, of course, we've had this conversation, Ben, that kind of brings the guided tour series to a close. And I'm really keen to continue this conversation in season 6. So I definitely encourage any of you listening to this not only to connect with all the partners you've heard from on this podcast, but also give us feedback and let us know where you want to take this conversation next, because I would just be only too delighted to speak to Ben again. So give us some comments on the social channels, as Ben called out, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in season 6. But Ben, thank you so much. Best to the family. Wish you much continued success. Best to the team as well, and look forward to keeping in touch, my friend.
Thanks, Dan, and to you and to your audience as well. I mean, appreciate the time people have taken to listen to us, and I think it's a great industry, and people are better for having traveled and enjoyed it. So, best, Dan, to you. Look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks so much for joining us on our latest episode of Travel Trends and our final episode in our multi-day tour guided series. I certainly enjoyed reconnecting with Ben Hall, the CEO of AAT Kings. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as well as the discussions with Globus and Colette and Explore. I'm definitely keen to continue this theme into season 6, so be sure to reach out and let us know if you want to feature any specific brands or individuals, and we'll look to bring them into next season's series. We have a number of exciting developments planned for season 6, but one of the other major developments that we just announced this week is our AI Summit. For those of you who are joining at the very beginning of this podcast, we just announced that in our newsletter this week. So be sure to register traveltrendspodcast.com, find out more information about speaking, sponsoring, or attending that event, which is going to be virtual, so you can attend anywhere in the world. And we are about to embark on a series of events. We're going to be in Miami shortly for the Aviation Festival, then Adventure Travel and Trade Conference in Denver, and then I'll be at the Focusrite Conference in Barcelona in June. So be sure to reach out too if you're going to be at any of those events, as I'd love to be able to record with many of our listeners that work across the industry to be able to showcase what you've been working on. And hopefully we'll have a chance to do that with many of you at our AI Summit in October. I also just wanted to say a special thanks again to the team at Tour Optima and Ben specifically for sponsoring this multi-day tour series that I was really keen to bring together. And as you've heard multiple times now, I am an investor and an advisor, and I'm very bullish on the multi-day tour category and seeing the platform that Ben had built. I am very optimistic about the future for partners on that platform. So if you're interested in having a better guest experience, there's no better platform out there than Tour Optima that is as feature complete. And you can find out more information just by checking out touroptima.com or sending an email to ben@touroptima.com to arrange a demo. So thanks again to Ben and the team, and we look forward to having you guys back as part of season 6. We also have a number of sponsors lined up already for season 6, which I'm thrilled about. One of them is Civitatis, the OTA that's based out of Spain, and they're actually going to be featured in next week's episode. We thought it would be a good transition as we move from multi-day tour to river cruise to bring on an OTA. So we're going to speak to Civitatis next week. We're also going to be speaking to Expedia as part of season 5. And then we're also going to be speaking to the founder of Viator. And I will save that conversation likely for the end of the season to wrap things up, because it was such a fascinating conversation I had with Rod Cuthbert. And I think it'll be a perfect way to close out season 5 after we do our In Destination series in partnership with Pernod Ricard. So there's lots to look forward to still in season 5. So make sure that you are registered on the streaming platform of your choice to get updates when our new episodes go live. And be sure to check out our social channels for clips and highlights. And until next week, safe travels.